everyone, my name is Laura and welcome to Expert Talks. Technological advancements have been a part of our lives for decades now, and it continuously brings us something new, something that did not seem possible 20, 10, or even 5 years ago. Amongst many different inventions and product evolutions, there is also artificial intelligence. From Siri to self-driving cars, artificial intelligence is progressing rapidly, and its introduction to aviation has also been made. Many of us might still understand AI as that talking car from Knight Rider, the romantic interest from the movie Her, or simply relate to AI in science fiction movies like The Matrix, iRobot, or Blade Runner. But what exactly is artificial intelligence and how is it being used in our life and aviation now? I am joined today by a true subject matter expert, Aeroclass instructor Ricardo Pilon. So hello, Ricardo, and thank you very much for joining me today.
Hi, Laura. You're welcome. How are you today?
I am good. I'm even better now that you've joined me. So I just want to explain to everyone who might not have seen our previous expert talks how it's going to go. So if you've been here, you know exactly what to expect. But for those who haven't, we're going to talk about Ricardo's personal experience. We're going to talk about e-learning and Aeroclass and his course. And then we're going to get into artificial intelligence, which is what his course is about. So without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ricardo. And Ricardo, please tell us, how did aviation become part of your life?
Yeah, it actually started quite early. According to my parents, they told me I was 8 years old, and I told one of my father's big bosses who was visiting from the Netherlands. I was born in Curacao and we lived there. When he asked me what I wanted to do in life, and I told him that I wanted to run KLM Royal Dutch Airlines. So my parents were a bit shocked of my answer, slightly embarrassed. At the same time, they realized I had a particular idea about my future career. And anyway, I was a bit embarrassed, and I understood later why it was a funny answer. But here's the thing. My father ran road construction companies during my childhood. So I was born in Curacao, the Dutch Caribbean, and my father took us to the airport where they also paved what's still the longest runway in the Caribbean, but also the famous one in St. Martin. So in addition, we often flew in and out to Amsterdam, also South America for vacations, and the States. And my parents were sure that that's how this whole thing about aviation started. So I was young, I was restless, and everything at some point revolved around aircraft, mobility, languages, and international travel. So I pursued all the education and specialized degrees that I could find in the field. I completed them. I even went so far as to complete a PhD in strategic airline management, and then I got into the business. It's still a passion. It's evolved a lot. Like the world has, but it's fascinating nonetheless.
Absolutely. And I wonder, looking back, if you can remember, looking at aviation from a young man's eyes, as you said, like 8 years old, and looking now, has it changed dramatically? Or do you still see that initial appeal that you had for this industry?
It definitely has. It depends on the perspective that you take. In terms of the overall industry and the focus on operations and safety, that hasn't necessarily changed, but the techniques we use and the technology today in terms of how we drive efficiency and how we reduce our impact on the industry, on the climate, has changed significantly. But also from a customer perspective, the tools we can make available to make it more convenient for people to travel and give more transparency and facilitate the process of how people basically go through airports and board and the information they get, that has changed dramatically. In other aspects, we see parallels. So we see some of the older technology and distribution still used and new channels being used. And so there's also this constant state of flux where things are moving and changing. But I think the phenomenal advances that have been made are in the reliability of aircraft and the safety in the industry, ensuring that the efficiencies we have achieved and having reduced our footprint for decades now, and that often people actually forget about, because it's become increasingly important as well. But incredible advances.
I see. So let's talk a bit more about the projects you've had in your career. Is there anything that really stands out for you, or something that you wish you could do all over again?
Yes, definitely. In the year 2000, there was a small team of 3 executives that invited me to join an airline startup in Toronto, in Canada. At the time, I was only 27, and with only 4 years of aviation experience, I was tasked with executing a creative commercial strategy. And even though we came up with very creative tactics that much later became industry practices, I would say 7 to 12 years later, we were undercapitalized and we couldn't make it. And the competitive environment was very tough, fighting against a new Air Canada that consolidated with Canadian Pacific, the Canadian Airlines. But many of the things that we pioneered are still only partially being done today. So luckily, I was able to pursue some of these things elsewhere and with other companies and modern marketplaces today, using new technologies that didn't exist back then. Even working with Airbus on revolutionary things now. But I would have liked to do this all over again in today's context.
So I'm guessing you love a bit of a challenge then.
Yes, in fact, one of the things that I've always done is find areas that I'm not familiar with, and to see by exploring them in more detail what benefits it could bring to my specific field, and then the function of the airlines that I support, or the airline or industry overall. So I'm constantly looking for ways essentially to leave the past a little bit behind us, respecting all the achievements that have been made, but also finding new ways to keep improving what it is and how we can continue to bring benefits to people and societies, because ultimately that's my overall mission. That's mission, I would say, or vocation that's driving me and that inspired me about the international and people aspect of aviation.
Do you think this curiosity to explore different areas and to see where we can improve is something that is definitely needed for someone working in aviation, or is there anything else that's more important?
There are many different possible career paths within the industry. So a lot depends on your interest, but also your personality. So some functions in an airline are very linear and operational because safety comes first. But in today's modern commerce world, customer engagement and customer experience is anything but linear. So I would say that if you want to grow and evolve in this industry, you have to make one big commitment. You have to want to constantly push yourself to learn new things, update your skills, and also find areas where you believe improvements can be made. But then you have to go back and work with your colleagues through collaboration and apply those things that you learned so you gain more experience. So more so than other conventional industries, I would say that, and because of an accelerated push for sustainable travel and tourism, you need to find ways to become and stay creative. And I think those two commitments, so the curiosity to learn and the flexibility to be creative, I find are the two most important ones.
I see. And you mentioned creativity, and I know that you're working on a book. So can you tell us a bit more about that? What is that book about? And, we just want to let people understand what they should be looking forward to.
Right. So the first book I officially published was entitled Cruising to Profits. This was in 2015. And this is about creating sustainable methodologies for business transformation methods and tools in the airline industry. It was also about creating new and innovative business models using new technology. So since 2015, though, a lot has changed. 2015 was also the year where artificial intelligence started to surface a little bit more, ever since the last 3 decades where it was more research based. And it's mainly because the main obstacle in artificial intelligence prior to the say the 2000s was that machines didn't really have enough memory. And this is also the background of machine learning. And that has been solved. So the tactical and strategic applications of artificial intelligence became much more relevant in many new fields and functions within the airline industry as well. And that means that there were more use cases. So since 2015 and today, I myself started specializing more in the technical aspects of strategic applications of artificial intelligence. And I decided that when Routledge publishers in the UK approached me to sign a contract to, in fact, write a book about that. So the new book is with Routledge publishers in London, the UK. The working title is Artificial Intelligence in Commercial Aviation. And it addresses all the different functions within an airline, but also airports and cargo, and looks then even beyond functions at enterprise level and addresses specific concerns about AI as well. And so in my spare time, I'm working on this and completing that. And the interesting aspect about this is that since I'm addressing every function in an airline, I haven't necessarily worked in every single function. For example, I've never worked in HR and recruitment. However, with my network and my colleagues, I'm able to draw from experience from other people and colleagues to also see and come up with ideas where artificial intelligence will be able to help them, and vice versa. I learned from some of their pain points where I think artificial intelligence will actually help them solve problems in their day-to-day jobs. And that's kind of the background of the book, and that's what it's leading towards.
Wonderful, thanks for that. So let's move a bit into learning, into e-learning actually. So as Aeroclass, we are an e-learning platform. I want to know what attracted you to Aeroclass. Why did you want to join the Instructor network here?
Well, really, there were two aspects. The number one was people. And second was the vision that these people, I'll talk about, the vision that people had with regard to modern education and training. So if I go back, I had an early relationship with Aeroclass colleagues, and it was based on trust and respect. But it wasn't until the plans came together that it made sense to become partners for these new courses. So what I'm specifically referring to is the vision around delivering training and facilitating learning using modern tools and on a kind of a cool platform. I thought was very timely. It is needed. It's also something that I've been a strong supporter about. In fact, I always wanted to give back to the industry. And so I think it gives me the great opportunity using modern technology to contribute and give back. But even today, as I mentioned, I force myself to keep training myself with new skills, which I can then share back as well when I apply it, combined with my practical experience in the business. And artificial intelligence is a great example. And in fact, it wasn't used or didn't really exist when I went through graduate school. So you can see how much and how quickly things change.
I see. So introduce your course. Let our viewers know what it's about and what can they expect from it. And especially the question, who should benefit from it the most?
Yes, I'll definitely touch on that. So in this course, really, we talk about what artificial intelligence is, but also what it means for the aviation industry, and specifically the benefits that it brings and who can best use it. Overall, the aim of artificial intelligence is to improve customer service and enhance convenience, but also to facilitate or generate profitable growth. Now, that said, this course is for anybody in aviation, in any of the operational, the commercial, and even the HR areas, like I mentioned, that is interested in modernizing functions and bring benefits to passengers, to employees, ultimately to company investors, but also to minimize the negative impacts that we have on the environment. So in this course, we cover the various perspectives of artificial intelligence, or AI. We start with the principles of AI, the objectives, but also how it's used in aviation today and going forward. We also discuss how you can identify opportunities in your company And in the second part of this course, we dive deeper into how artificial intelligence actually works, which components it exists of, and also what it needs to function. How does it work? So throughout each step in this course, I show illustrations in aviation. And finally, we have a case study where course participants are able to learn how to apply artificial intelligence for building an airline startup from scratch. And this is pretty novel stuff.
I see. So I want to talk about that artificial intelligence a bit more. If someone is watching this and kind of has the same background as me, for me personally, artificial intelligence was always that science fiction movie thing, and talking cars and robots and self-driving spaceships. And then when people say that, oh, we actually do have artificial intelligence now, we actually use it in our everyday life, and it sounds a bit weird to me because I never realized that it can be something quite small but still very much impactful in our everyday lives. So can you tell, as an expert, what is artificial intelligence in a few words for someone who doesn't really understand that, and just give us a few examples where we use it every day?
Sure. It's interesting what you mentioned, because it's true that in the early days, the visionaries put out images of some of the aspects of AI and were pushing some of this, and it maybe looked spooky. But in fact, the things that lead us to be able to do those things with robots are just as fascinating. But sometimes in order to adopt it, we have to understand that and learn from the baby steps. And I think, well, this is what it's all about. But artificial intelligence really originated with the goal of using machines to mimic how humans think, how they analyze things, and how we act to make decisions. Humans process information and we can reason, and we use a lot of information to arrive at making good decisions in everyday life and at work as well. So the idea was to use the advent of computing and computers to imitate what people actually did to solve problems using information and identified patterns and links between information. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the problem in the past was memory, but today the machines can remember and they can learn, and it's helping us to accelerate many things that we as humans cannot realistically do anymore in today's very fast-moving digital world, where we want to be able to do things in real time. And this notion of real time has actually accelerated a lot of why we are adopting AI in many things. So let's look at that then. We benefit from AI in almost every aspect in our personal lives already today. And many of the things we're not that familiar with or aware of. But we all do use Google Maps or Waze. We use self-check-in kiosks at the airport. We know what smart replies in LinkedIn or smartphones look like. We know what digital wallets are and how they work. We use mobile payment. We use telephone or chat bots when we dial somewhere for help. We see recommendations on Netflix or Prime. And the most obvious one, which is still actually getting more and more sophisticated, is online search like Google. But things like you mentioned robots and self-driving cars, they actually use a combination of AI-based techniques, including computer vision. So that's even more sophisticated and requires deep learning and things we talk about in the course. But we can even use artificial intelligence now, believe it or not, to understand and make jokes. I'm not kidding. This is actually being looked at by Google. So it's also getting very creative. Whether we use it or need it, some aspects is questionable. But I do think that more and more use cases for the possibilities will be found.
And of course, aviation as an industry also been involved in this transformation, because of course, over the last, let's say 20 years, it's changed so much in terms of like all the technological advancements. Even something simple that comes simple to us right now, like scanning your passport when boarding a plane, or having your boarding pass on your phone. But what advancements, especially from the AI side, have been the biggest and most impactful, revolutionary even, and were there any that did not prove as useful?
So there are many angles of response to this. One is, of course, the customer, how the customer has benefit, or the airlines in terms of efficiency, and of course there's a climate, or which combines a lot of these things actually. But I think the most impactful ones are those that help us save our climate and reduce our CO2 footprint and other pollutants, but also by reducing fuel consumption. So AI is used and has been used for years now in optimizing routes, in air navigation, in air traffic control, in fuel burn itself, reducing fuel burn of aircraft in flight by trimming aircraft better, for example, or by avoiding weather more ahead of time instead of responding to sudden events, or even on the ground. For example, how aircraft taxi, or which engines to use by how many minutes for the taxi that is expected for before a specific takeoff. So it's also used to prevent maintenance and better schedule preventative maintenance and ensure safe operation. But as I mentioned, there have also been huge customer service improvements. For example, the way that we shop and book travel, how we can make travel and airport experiences more secure and smooth. You mentioned passport and readers as well, but also how we can reduce congestion and delays. I'm thinking about situational awareness at airport aprons, for example. Customers also like to use their mobile phones, and of course we can provide more and more transparency during your trip and everything that's happening during your trip and what's happening with your bag and whether it's delayed or not, where it currently is, but also at which baggage carousel you will be able to expect to find your bag. So the other aspect is that AI also helps us to elevate jobs and remove tedious or repetitive tasks from people, so they can actually do smarter things and less mundane things. There are a lot of repetitive things that we can remove from people's desks. AI also helps people to automate things that either take too long to assist people, for example, on the phone, which means we can take the pressure of waiting lines or the pressure of the staff working in call centers. It's also helping to screen resumes. I mentioned HR earlier and recruitment, and it helps to improve hiring so that there's no bias in terms of making sure that we have a diverse approach to the people we look at and remove all biases from any process. And I think that's very meaningful. Now, there have been areas where AI was perhaps less useful, particularly when the data used to write scripts of sets of rules, which is essentially the definition of an algorithm, was not fit for purpose. But it was either the amount of data that's not enough or the quality that's not good enough. And then things like recommendations to people on content might be off. But there are more tools available today that can address the data quality. And this is where, again, people are essential. Humans determine the goals of artificial intelligence, and humans also determine the guardrails that the models have to respect. So ethics and ethical AI is becoming more and more of a hot topic, especially around data privacy. And earlier I mentioned diversity and inclusion. But again, people can set guardrails and the goals within AI governance to address all these matters. So there is definitely potential for AI to, let's say, run astray and create negative outcomes. But this is where people, the actual people, need to act as almost police officers and agree to safeguard the guidelines that we want to have in our society.
So am I right to understand that, again, the future of AI is very much dependent on humans and on our minds and how much we want it to advance, because it's not going to be easy without our help, basically?
That's completely true, what you just said. An algorithm is, at its most basic level or description, is a set of rules. Without any rules or without any guidelines on what it needs to achieve, it doesn't create itself. It doesn't try to fit for purpose or do anything by itself. So this should be some sort of a safeguard for people that are extremely concerned about it. But when people see things like self-driving cars, then yes, the concerns people have are about the things that a car would not be able to recognize, or a computer vision that doesn't know what an obstacle is to avoid, for example. But this is where extensive training is required. But I compare that to a person that just got a driver's license and still need to learn about different speeds and different types of obstacles and how a car responds to obstacles, or avoiding an obstacle, etc. So just like humans do, models have to be trained, and we do this through supervised training, which is basically guiding the model on how to function best and how to achieve its objective best. But as I mentioned, there's nothing that even humans don't have to learn from the beginning. And all we're trying to do is to automate some of the things that humans are quite simply not able to do so much in real time with the volumes we have today. So it is there to support human beings.
Yeah, so I guess, with all those science fiction movies where they run with the plot line saying that robots are going to take over the world and, destroy us all, I think, for now, the robots should still leave us because I think without our help, they will not get better. So, well, we've got that covered at least now. But let's talk, because you mentioned, not recognizing obstacles in a self-driving car and all that. But if we stick to aviation and AI, are there any downsides to this at what we have at the moment?
So clearly, some of the downsides in artificial intelligence or artificial intelligence applications today is where it is used to mimic, let's say, human voice, like in using an HR interview bot. I recently sat through some, not as a candidate, but just to look at the technology and to see what the opportunities are. But it's still quite robotic and it's not that personable. And this is where some people are looking at using AI in a metaverse, because people are more used to liking video games and augmented reality experiences. But purely talking to a person that is facilitating a robotic interview that does respond intelligently to your comments and even questions is not quite there. And the argument is that we as humans, if we're going to be looking at something that is supposed to look like a human, don't want to deviate from anything that's near 100%. So this is a part where maybe in a different reality, we would be more open towards it. And I think the metaverse will give us a little bit more leeway in getting used to these things. And this, again, is a field of study. But another one of the downsides is that AI is only as good as it is trained with experience, and artificial intelligence and machine learning doesn't have all the responses to the things that it has never seen before or cannot understand. So if you take AI out of language or text-based and specific context, it will be lost, quite honestly. And so, but then I would say even a child or adult without any insight or having learned anything would be equally lost. So we should not forget that we cannot expect something from technology that humans themselves are not able to. And this is an example I like to give, is that we would never accept a self-driving car to cause an accident, but we are willing to tolerate that unfortunately accidents by humans happen. And I think this is where the difference lies. Now, on the flip side, which is not necessarily a downside of artificial intelligence itself, is around adoption. So AI is still, honestly, it's still poorly understood. And it took me a while as well. It's taking me years to improve it, and I still am. But it requires specialists to build scripts and to understand how you get to desirable outcomes. So that therefore means that many people do not necessarily trust the outcomes of automation. This is black box phobia in a way. But there we have found something as well that alleviates this too now. It's colloquially called Explainable AI. And what it allows essentially is to expose in graphics how the algorithms work and explains why each prediction is based on sound data, understanding, and explains it or explains the reasoning. It's actually visualizing explanations better than humans can, for example, with PowerPoint or Eclipse. It's extremely powerful. And I believe that this will also help unlock some of the AI applications and help companies to adopt it more and in more areas.
I see, very interesting. I'm sure we're giving a lot to think about to all our viewers. But just to end this conversation, can you tell us, as I said, as a true subject matter expert, what is waiting in the future for AI and aviation?
My personal view, I'm working on some specific use cases that don't exist today in the airline or travel and tourism industry. The only thing I will say about it is that I believe that we are going to combine different spheres, let's say, that will blend. And I personally believe that a big angle that will be used is how we as humans interact on and through social commerce. So I expect the whole platformification, some people call it, wave to actually change as well. And I see that we will find some commoditization in AI, which basically means that AI becomes a standard commodity people can purchase and plug and play and use for specific use cases. And I believe that the true intellectual property and creativity will be beyond that and will be on how we center on individuals. And I believe that a combination of artificial intelligence and in the metaverse and on blockchain will bring us new use cases. So it's not necessarily AI by itself, because yes, we will roboticize and automate more with more insights across many value chains. But I think it's how we experience it that will be the next wave. And I believe that Facebook and Meta are on something there as well. But I also believe that in the travel industry and retailing of experiences, which is a lot more than booking a trip, that's where we see most of the changes centered around individuals in their own atmosphere or verse, as I call it, rather than through booking engines. And that's why I think we'll see the biggest changes. Essentially, what I'm also saying is that it's my personal vision that we will see a wave of digital assistants that are designed by and for individuals to use. So it makes even Booking Pass completely flexible.
So we're gonna finish this on a bit of a cliffhanger, I think. We're just gonna leave those thoughts out there for everyone to think on. But that's our time today, and I'd like to thank you, Ricardo, for sharing your thoughts, your experience with me and our viewers, and I bet we all have learned something new today.
Thank you very much, Laura. I much appreciate your time.
Not a worry. So if you're interested in the course that Ricardo gives at Aeroclass, please visit our website and find it in the video course selection. But for now, thank you very much again for watching and take care.
Thank you, Laura.